What's the verb that you use? You don't use broadcast. You use
Push.
push.
Broadcast is a better verb though, it's a more clear.
I feel like I've heard Grayson say broadcast.
Actually, okay.
Have I? I don't know. All right.
Well, Gretchen, I've recorded every single conversation we've ever had on my phone, so no, I'm kidding.
Well, thanks for being here, everybody, again. I just want to confirm, I think I know, but Haley, Christina, Chris, we are, you can hear us well enough, right? Okay. We're in a new setting today, so I just wanted to make sure that that's true. Well, it's 6:05, and I welcome you to this June 2nd meeting of the Human Rights Commission's Task Force on Disability Rights. We are one shy of quorum, but we're going to go ahead and get together and introduce ourselves all the same. Let's start with folks online. Haley, Christina, Chris, whomever goes first. Your name, your ward, and your relationship to this task force.
I'll go first since I'm not muted. Christina Ballard. I live in Ward 7 and I serve on the Human Rights Commission.
And this task force.
And this task force.
Haley Barenbaum. I still don't know what ward I live in, but I am South Salem, past the Roths on Liberty, and just a fellow disabled Salemite and labor union worker.
And I'm Chris Snyder. I'm with the City of Salem. I'm actually in the mayor's and city manager's office with Gretchen. And I live in Ward 4, I believe, in South Salem. Southeast Salem.
Thank you. Tony, do you want to get us started here?
I'm Tony Marys, and actually on the map, I'm not in a ward. I'm in the no man's land. I live at Sequoia Crossings in North Salem, just this side of the Kaiser boundary.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Marshall. I live in Ward 2. I am the vice chair of the Human Rights Commission and a member of this task force.
That's my new ward. We're going to be neighborly. Gretchen, you want to?
Oh, sure. My name is Gretchen Bennett. I am on the staff team at the Human Rights Commission staff liaison, she, her pronouns.
And I'm Joaquin Ladamik, chair of the commission of this task force, currently a resident of Ward 8. Did we receive any public comment?
None received.
And I don't see any members of the public here, so. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I don't believe we can take action.
Oh, we can't, we don't have quorum.
That's right.
I forgive me.
We've also recently clarified, we don't technically have to approve the agenda, I remember in our procedures, so I'm needing to take that
But we
item
would
off.
put our minutes, wouldn't we?
We would our minutes if we were continuing to do minutes.
But we don't do that.
So we're gonna be able to slide through.
We are streamlining processes.
We are.
Left and
More
right.
time to talk.
We are.
That's scary. More time to talk. Well, so that fast tracks us into our conversation tonight, which is I think our third now in a series of conversations about different areas as it relates to the mission and scope and purpose of this task force, which, as I'm sure Chris knows by way of Gretchen, is about, but just in case he doesn't, or for those online who might be listening, is about taking a broad, eagle-eyed view of accessibility in Salem and making recommendations about at a high level about how to improve or that's accessibility in Salem. So those are recommendations that will ultimately be made both to the General Commission as well as City Council, depending on what's appropriate. And we're in this process, Chris, of meeting with stakeholders, learning about different areas on our way towards producing those recommendations in the late fall. And so we've heard from your colleagues in planning and others who are talking about parks and zoning and housing. And here we are talking about the role of the ADA. I think it was preliminary to speak about business, but we couldn't have business folks come tonight, but learning about the city's role with ADA and other services. So I'll leave it there as my preamble. Gretchen, I don't know where you want to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to offer some general remarks on this as kind of foundational. See what questions you have. And we've also extended an invitation to the Northwest ADA Technical Assistance Center to see if they can attend our July or August meeting to further this conversation. So I was essentially gonna begin things with some basic notes tonight. You might remember last month we looked at and discussed some theming of areas that the group is interested in, including housing, including approaching the work in a way that's aware of sensory type topics, you know, neurodiversity. Some of those topics were themes in our conversation. Another theme in the conversation was around the role of business and recognizing the importance that businesses play, the important role that businesses play in helping areas be accessible. So we were wanting to unpack that a little bit further. Generally, I'm going to share my screen in just a second, but just a real general basic thing that you all may know already is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the federal law, of course, has something called Title II that relates to cities and talks about how what cities do needs to be compliant with the ADA. But it also has something called Title III, which speaks to how important it is for businesses to deliver services in an accessible way. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And what I wanted to do is point out some of what the Northwest ADA Center does. This center was set up and funded by the federal government to assist people in the West Coast. You can see Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And they have a whole tab and a resource specifically for businesses. And you can see they answer questions. So businesses can call. I've worked with these folks before with particular business questions when businesses have been trying to navigate either how to do better or what their base requirements are. So we've together accessed this resource as one of our tools for researching things. They also do their best to provide training and fact sheets. I'll show you that. They don't themselves fund things or they're not attorneys, but they're a resource that's available. I'm going to click on the business tab and show you the kinds of things that come out. And they talk about, and I think when we talk about businesses, you know, this concept of public accommodation comes up. But I always understand, even if you're a business without a storefront, you're going to have a responsibility to deliver services in a way that's accessible. Maybe you have a website or you have a customer that's trying to reach you with a particular audible disability, for example. There'll be other adaptations in addition to the built environment. But you can see they've built a number of fact sheets, universal design, the website, healthcare, just a number of things. There's checklists. So I just kind of wanted to give you a sense of it that's available to businesses in the area. But we'll see if they can come. I think they give you, of course, a more robust conversation about what they do and some of the kinds of questions that that comes up. Before I'm going to navigate off at this point and navigate away from the ADA Center, did anybody have any questions or comments about that or generally about the role of business?
How often, Gretchen, do you, Ms. Joaquin, how often do you refer businesses to this page or these services?
Not very often. It doesn't come up very much. Maybe annually or so. So it doesn't come up super often, but enough to be a routine. I'll call it too. Like if I'm struggling with something, as I'm listening to a person in the community with a question, you know, I won't always refer a business. I'll also call it myself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This may be an unfair question to you as a staff person to the city, but what's your sense of how effective this center is? I've never used it myself or its services, never recommended it to anybody. I mean, are they responsive, proactive, helpful, effective?
In my experience, yes. They haven't always been able to be super duper timely. I've asked questions that at times have taken quite a while to hear a response. I think they get backlogged and they have capacity challenges like many entities and organizations.
Sure.
But the information that I've received, in my experience, has jived with what I've read, what I've heard from other ADA coordinators in other cities or from our attorneys, for example. So I've found the information to be helpful. Yeah. But you know, I probably can't completely answer the question just from, you know. But it is part of the landscape as we think about what businesses can access. And of course, to understand the basic requirements, you'd go to the ADA itself and the law as well as the state law, you know, because we have Oregon's law that relates to accessibility and you have the federal law which relates to accessibility. And then when I get off of this, I was going to talk briefly about the city's interaction with businesses too. But we'll see if there's other thoughts or questions. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I forgot that I was gonna try to share a second web page and I didn't before this meeting call it up. I didn't remember to do it. So I might send it out to you all directly after so you don't have to wait for me. But the other page I was gonna speak to is how the city supports or connects in with businesses with ADA compliance. Anytime there's a new construction going on or a modification to a building, our team within the community planning and development department works with businesses to try to remove barriers to accessibility and to ensure that our plans are compliant, you know, with state and federal law related to accessibility. So there'll be a number of things that they do, whether it's checking in on what does the parking lot look like. You know, when they do inspections of construction, they're going to be checking the built environment. So on built environment facilities type areas for businesses, the city plays a role in that approval process to make sure there's accessibility. So we have a web page up that helps businesses to see that information as they're navigating renovations or new construction, for example. So I wanted to share that. I hope that's I know fairly brief, but an introduction to the whole concept of the city certainly has a role in ensuring what the city does is ADA compliant. You know, what the city does needs to be accessible to people with disabilities. And there's desire, I know, from this task force to go beyond what's required. You know, what can we do? What can we do broadly to remove barriers? But businesses also play a really key role in the experience of those locations to ensure that the services that they're delivering are compliant with Title III of the ADA.
Gretchen, does the city offer incentives to businesses? So I was looking at the Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal, and they offer a couple different grant programs, the Riverfront Downtown Capital Improvement Grant Program and the Riverfront Downtown Strategic Project Grant Program. But neither of them specifically like address, you know, improvements for like ADA, like capital projects to improve accessibility, like, you know, lowering seat counters so they are more accessible to individuals that are using wheelchair, or, you know, the installation of, you know, push buttons for automatic door openings. And I guess as we think long-term for, you know, recommendations as a body, that could be one that we, you know, potentially look into is, you know, is there a way to incentivize business owners, like existing business owners, to conduct renovations or retrofits to make their spaces more ADA accessible?
Good. I don't know the answer. I haven't seen that program in the time I've been here, and I think I would have come across it if it exists. And all the times I've connected with the city over spaces where there is no renovation and there is a barrier to accessibility, and we hit a challenge in that they may not be technically required to make a change because they're not making a renovation and we don't have a. And so I think I would have come across it if there was an incentive program. So I appreciate the line of inquiry, like maybe that could be a recommendation to figure out how to fund something like that. Yeah.
I will say, council adopted our housing production strategy. A Tuesday ago,
Yeah, last
Yeah.
Tuesday.
And there was a big talk about, you just came and talked to us about this housing production strategy last month, and there's been a lot of back and forth around, well, is it specific enough? Is the guidance clear enough? The planning commission rather controversially voted not to approve a recommendation of adoption, and then the city council ultimately did. But to your point, Robert, I'm wondering if maybe that is, as they kind of attend to those details and build out more robust recommendations beyond just the broad brush strokes of the strategy that was adopted last Tuesday, if something like that may not be possible.
Yeah.
Because I know that they have in the goal something like 60% of all new housing is accessible or something like that. So well, that's fine as a goal, but all the work remains of how do we get there, and what kind of leverages do we have as a city government to kind of promote that, and that might be an approach, so.
Yeah.
Even if not dedicated incentives, just expanding the eligibility of some of those, capital improvement grant programs,
Sure.
through the renewal, like the Riverfront Downtown Capital Improvement Grant or some of those other grant programs, expanding eligibility to include, ADA accessibility, and then educating those businesses that is a new eligibility that have been added to those existing programs.
Good.
So, any more questions or comments for Gretchen?
And that is what I brought for this section.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess, go ahead, Christina.
Oh, Christina, you're on mute.
There we go. This is more to do with housing, but I think last time, or maybe it was the time before, we had said we could try to find out, when it comes to, apartments and things like that, at what governmental level could, requirements be made regarding ADA compliant units?
This is Gretchen. Christina, you're right. And I have a note to report back to you all tonight. I'm ultimately still working on that. I've been talking with our planning team and our legal team about that. And it certainly could happen at the statewide level where the state could adjust requirements. We're exploring what options there might also be at the city level around
Right, oh, okay.
around both requirements, but also things that help how a person would even get in to the apartment. And this might have been what you said. I don't think I've got my words with me very well today. For example, if there's a unit that comes open that's an accessible unit, changing the way the communication happens or the requirement to advertise, and if you've got people on a waiting list for an apartment, how can you align with a fair process the waiting list to help have a person with an accessibility need into that accessible apartment, as opposed to
Yeah, that was the big question.
Yeah. We're still working through the questions on what would be a possible policy change at the city level, what's a policy change at the state level. We've been having that conversation, but I don't have good clarity yet tonight. So please do stay tuned. I mean, ultimately, I think there's options at both the city and the state level on that.
But at the end of the day, we don't have an answer to that question, so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, not yet.
We don't do that, right?
Yeah, we don't currently do that. I think the current reality would be, of course, multifamily housing developments have a number of accessible units. However, there's also pathways for people getting into apartments that could lead to a person without a mobility need getting into the unit. And then you have how many of the units occupied by people with disabilities who don't have disabilities is a challenge. But other factors like qualifying for the unit, application time play a really big role in that. And so changing that in a way that works is, I think, the question.
And not, making everything about the HPS, but those are questions that I think we're actively exploring in that process
Yeah.
as well as, you can say all day long that we provide a bunch of affordable housing, maybe even 16% of the market share of new housing is, but if you're not filling it with people who need it, you're not doing anything other than building homes that are accessible, and even then, there are open questions around how robust that accessibility is to begin with. And so I think your question is one that needs answered pretty robustly, Christina, but I don't want to speak for the city, but the city doesn't do that right now. That we don't have mechanisms right now. So it's just be something new.
Yeah.
I would love to be a part of those conversations in this body, is how do we think about that? What might that look like? What might, and be careful with my language here, maybe not like a preferential treatment, that might run afoul of certain legal standards, but what might filling those dwellings with folks who need those sort of dwellings look like in practice? And I don't know the answer to that question. So
Yeah.
you chew on that more.
Yep.
I know you said that you didn't want to waste our time trying to get the website out, but I kind of am interested to know what that looks like, and if you could talk more, a greater length rather about that process. I guess I'm broadly interested in the way, what responsibilities businesses have and what ways those responsibilities are enforced at the city level kind of generally, but it's interesting to me what you mentioned about, when construction is happening, when X, Y, and Z is happening, what resources are available to businesses to ensure that they are being accessible, because for two reasons. One, I want to know what they're required to do and what they think they have to do, and then two, what resources or any appeals or complaints or whatever might be available to folks with disabilities should they encounter obstacles to accessibility in any given construction zone or something of that ilk. So I would like to spend some time looking at that in greater detail.
Absolutely, and thank you for giving me a minute, Joaquin, while I was listening to pull up the web page that I had in mind. You gave me a second to find it. I'm grateful.
It's that one on the right. On my meetings, which is the wrong tab. That makes sense.
Yeah, how do I get to the right tab?
So you click on that, and it will start sharing that, and then once you go on that tab, you can get over.
Thank you. Huh. Oh, not that. I see. Oh,
It's kind of a little way, yeah.
yeah,
There you go.
here we go.
And you can X that out. The participant.
Oh, thank you. Okay, friends, thanks for being with me. Do you see a page that says ADA barrier removal? Those of you on Zoom,
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, great. Yeah, this is the page in the City of Salem's website. And so, of course, it highlights the big picture around new construction, alterations to existing buildings, and the discussion of an improvement plan. The design professional submits documents appropriately. And the city staff reviews those proposals, the alterations or the new construction in documentation, and I believe in person as well.
So I'm gonna interject. So that 25% rule, I'm trying to track here. So is that 25% of what? Of
My understanding is of the budget, but I should confirm that.
so no more than or at minimum or so second, because there's also a language about readily achievable up at the very top.
Yeah,
Is that a standard set by ORS or SRC? Or
I believe it's
something?
ORS
ORS.
and the Oregon Structural Code,
Oh, okay.
which is a statewide, yeah. I can scroll down a little bit more.
Up to 2 rooms. But did anybody have any questions about these? I know we're kind of reading them all together here for the first time as opposed to in advance, but anybody have any reactions to these ADA barrier removal guidelines?
And I can also send out the link, and if you do want to get into it at a different level, I can sure invite a colleague to assist us too, if that would be helpful to everybody. But just to give you a sense of, again, that larger picture of, businesses play a pretty significant role in the accessibility in Salem, and part of that is their interface with community planning and development to make sure that alterations and new construction are meeting the objectives. Would you like me to keep that up a little longer, or would you like?
No, I'm
Okay,
okay.
okay,
Unless folks have that request.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing.
So in case folks didn't get to it, I'll just read briefly. There's about 12 kind of umbrella categories under which this 25% rule kind of applies. So we're thinking about who our partners might be, would be places of lodging, not including owner-occupied establishments renting fewer than 6 rooms. Establishments serving food or drinks, or restaurants, among other things. Places of exhibition or entertainment. This is a public gathering. The example they gave: auditoriums, sales or rental establishments like grocery, service establishments like a laundromat or a bank, public transportation terminals, depots or stations, places of public display or collection like a museum, places of recreation like a park, places of education like a K through 12 school or a childcare facility, social service center establishments, and places of exercises or recreation. So that'd be gymnasiums, health spas, bowling alleys, golf courses. Obviously, a non-exhaustive list. So one question, so I we probably can't react to the content of this right now, just for kind of react to it the first time, but what's your sense, Gretchen, is maybe a hard question to answer, but we've kind of been going back and forth a little bit about the tensions between, oh, well, what is mandated by the state or federal law? What is the room or legal room that the city may or may not have? Obviously not less than what is required by the state or federal government, but what can we do more? What's your sense of what could be done for a rule like this, for these guidelines? I mean, could we, for example, I'm making this up, but could we, for example, add type of public accommodation? Or could we, for example, require, instead of a maximum 25% rule, a minimum benchmark of you really, if it's warranted, you really have to spend at least 10% of your budget to make sure it's whatever on X, Y, and Z. I mean, what's your sense of what those sort of adjustments?
Yeah, my sense, first of all, would need, of course, further education and clarification from colleagues who work in this. But with that caveat, my sense is that it includes trying to understand where, if at all, we can be different from the Oregon State structural code. If you're talking about the built environment, there's a portion of the state law that speaks to expecting uniformity throughout the state. So for example, to require a built element that's different from what's in the code, so far I understand to be uncertain whether that's doable because of that expectation for uniformity. There may be areas around incentivizing or other aspects that works with that statewide code where we do have opportunity, but I'm not quite clear yet on exactly where those are. And then you have to bring in all of the goals and objectives that come along with building. Some will say it's an important value, the inclusion is an important value, and we must do everything possible to require and incent accessible building. Other will say, if you're very different from other communities, you might lose the ability to attract people to build and develop in the community because people will go where those rules are not. And you have to calibrate that tension and consider that tension in policy recommendation. That's where, when I was answering Christina's question earlier, like about the specific nature of, well, can we adjust how apartments run their waiting list, for example, getting into the clarity on where we do have the space within those uniformity expectations is what we're trying to dig through right now. It's a good question.
But and I appreciate that answer. I think it was diplomatic. I will say, I don't know if say, for example, a recognition would be, okay, landlords, you have to wait until, someone applies. An intervention could be, okay, and this would be maybe more burdensome on the applicant as opposed to the landlord, but one incident could be, we're gonna have someone who supports you in finding housing. Or something like that, or having some kind of incentive program for folks with disabilities who wouldn't otherwise have easy access to housing. This is hard. It's hard to find housing, move, sometimes qualify, not be overly cost burden for any of those things. When you have disability, especially folks who, as a lot of people with disabilities are on fixed incomes, even at very young ages. I mean, it's really challenging. And so how do we ameliorate those barriers? It may not be, to your point, we don't want to burden developers or landowners, but we do want to make equal opportunity for people, and so that you can come at that different directions.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the one; it can be the other. I guess my point. Similarly, thinking of codes, I can appreciate, and I think now on the planning commission, I appreciate more and more every day running the risk of unduly burdening developers. I understand that. And, if we had language we could add that were preferential guidelines, non-requirements, that feels like a nothing burger, but it could be something because it could do two things. One, developers might say, oh, I can do that. They can look at something, some kind of requirement that isn't a requirement, but a preferred thing and say, I can do that. We can do that all at the same time. And that would be nice, and that might change the culture of development. This is a big might. But the second thing I might accomplish, which might be worth something, even though it'll feel like less than what we want, is if Salem starts doing something, people will start taking notice of that. And it may not be immediately, it may be in the long run, but when statewide codes are amended, which they are, the people who will be doing kind of the policy analysis in 5 or 10 years will be looking back and say, oh, Salem has done this for quite a while. And let's make that a requirement. That's a really good idea. They've had good success. Actually, some developers voluntarily adopting these codes, and it's really working for Salem. And Salem's not Portland, which is a big scary city for a lot of people, and it's not, whatever. So I think there is maybe something to say about doing that if folks who know more than we do think that's possible.
Yeah.
Let's have a few thoughts. One, maybe when we get more into the meat of what are the disabilities the ADA is really clear about, what are the things we'd like to see improvements in, and maybe we have like some kind of a tiered incentivized program for developers that says, tax breaks or whatever if you do this much more, or, something like that. The other thing that comes to mind, reading the documents that Eunice shared, we seem to have a relationship with the Oregon Home Builders Association. Wouldn't that be a really good resource for us to find out what is their culture and philosophy about ADA building? Like, finding out what they think about it would help inform us on maybe how much wiggle room, we'd have in incentivizing specific things in the building process.
Do you think it'd be worth inviting?
Maybe, let me explore that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's a great strategy. I mean, it feels like the right thing to do. I mean, and by the way, that group may be a group with which we really don't agree on a lot of things.
Right.
But it'd be good to talk to them and just understand what, to your point, I mean, what are they thinking about this? Because it could be a non-starter, but it could not be.
Well, it wouldn't hurt to get more information.
I like that idea.
I'll explore it.
Any other reactions? Go ahead, Haley, please.
I'm just afraid with a tiered incentive, they might start thinking, or developers might think, well, these disabilities are the only ones that matter. Not, looking at the big picture of how everything can affect different people with different disabilities, different ways. That's what would make me nervous is with a tiered system is isolating other people.
That's fair. I think that's fair. And I'm kind of agnostic as what a recommendation might look like. But I think maybe Tony, if I understand your point is, that there's, there has to be ways that we can differentially incentivize people in different areas. And one reaction, may be, oh, well, you're not going to capture, this community or that community, but I think there might be a way to do that more inclusively. That could work. So I think
Okay.
you two will take it.
This is Gretchen. I think last month, some spoke to those principles of universal design, which
Yeah.
are such a wonderful foundational idea that bring in building for all types of abilities. That can be ultimately the right organizing principle, but I know there's practical. That isn't always possible in different situations or can be the most expensive. And so then where do you start making investments that you have to?
This might be at a left field, and I didn't talk to Gretchen about this beforehand, and I'm gonna bring it up at the General Human Rights Commission on Wednesday. But I was recently talking to some folks with Paid Leave Oregon and OHA. And I did not know, maybe you guys didn't either, I did not know that you qualify for Paid Leave Oregon, which is 12 weeks of paid leave at different rates of your salary, depending on your income. If you experience a violence crime in Oregon. I didn't know that. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is talking about business and and I think business can also mean employers and I didn't know about that. So I think if someone has like a disability or experiences something and is struggling with whether they have a disability or not, if they are victims of something like it's called SAFE. So there's 3 different categories of qualification: family leave, medical leave, those two explanatory. And the third one is safe leave. So if you or your child are survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, harassment, bias, crimes, or stalking, you are eligible for 12 weeks of paid leave. Haley's nodding her head. She may have known this because I know she's a labor person.
Yeah, it was a big deal when that came out. We had to, we have a lot of companies who are trying to stack FMLA and paid leave Oregon.
Yeah.
Or use sick days instead of the paid leave and all of that. So we also have a brochure at my office for domestic violence in both English and Spanish and what the state and city can help with as well. So I can always bring one in next month.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what I'm thinking of, for any kind of bias crime like the ones that we talked about at HRC, but in particular, if you're struggling with something that's influencing your mental health, your capacity to do things, which it does really relate to this conversation, I would love to be able to find a way to more proactively, maybe you already do this, Gretchen, I don't know, but to connect folks with their employers, you're
Right.
dealing with something, because, and I asked the woman who was presenting, I said, that's really hard, I would imagine, in these cases, because they do require documentation, they don't just, right, like, check, but documentation can look like, a lot of things, and so I'm wondering if, for example, particularly in this area, what role we may play as, literally we, the HRC may play in helping
Yeah,
help folks, or the city generally, and what mechanisms we might have at our disposal
Yeah.
to have folks, help. We're only one of 2 states, the other one being Colorado in the whole country, that qualifies for paid leave under safety. I thought that was notable.
yeah, thank you.
Did you raise your hand, honey?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, it sounds to me like that kind of situation would qualify as a temporary disability, which, Social Security views, permanent versus temporary disability, seniors and others with disabilities, I think what they're called now. They also have, differentiated temporary and permanent disability. So I think that basically what Paid Oregon is saying is we're gonna recognize this as a temporary disability. That doesn't preclude it from becoming permanent, but
Right.
more and more trauma is being accepted as a disabling, condition.
Yeah,
I
And
thought.
kind of, I guess, sorry, we've had to talk a lot about this at work. So paid leave Oregon, it doesn't necessarily say it's not a permanent disability. It's an allotted amount of time where it's excused. It should be excused by your employer, and your employer can't terminate you. So it does count as another protected leave.
I hope that wasn't too much of a hijack of the, I thought maybe it related to our.
Yeah.
programs.
I think it does. It's another role that the employer or the business would have. There's a whole arm on that ADA technical assistance piece about a business as an employer, and that's true for government employers as well, of course, to be respectful and supportive of people with accommodations, and that's a good example.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Did you know that?
I did not know,
Yeah.
I know about paid leave Oregon, I
Sure.
did not know bias crime qualified within that area of safety. I'd understood that to be about like dating and sexual violence, domestic violence. I didn't know bias crime was in there, so I'm glad to be aware of that.
It's really interesting.
And it does open questions, like you said, about our role and what we come to learn about situations and how that lines up with what the documentation requirements are.
We make, or you make so many referrals
Yeah,
to people, whether it's bully or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a good thing to have in Gretchen's arsenal,
I think so too.
kind of a militaristic term, but at your disposal.
Yeah,
To help people.
I think so too.
Did,
I'm glad you
and
pointed out.
did you know?
Yeah.
But I appreciate that. It was kind of a more abbreviated conversation we've had in the last few sessions, but if folks have any other questions or comments or reactions to Title III of the ADA, recognizing we'll hopefully have a couple more opportunities to talk more about that. Well, if not, I do want to spend the balance of our time together, talking about the rest of our time together, and planning things out. So here we are in June, and if you may recall, we were going to spend the summer talking to people, learning from them, and that looks like a couple of ways. We could do what we've been doing now, which we've had, Eunice, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm forgetting, I forgot her name all of a sudden, I've known her for like a while. Eunice and Gretchen have come, and that's one way of doing that. We're going to continue having folks come from the city and elsewhere to present. And we did talk about holding forums and having the public come to us, or maybe even better put, us going to the public and talking to folks where they are. And I want to be able to, in the time that we have left, kind of think more about that. And one, who do you want to hear from, either by way of staff or other kind of CBO leaders in the area, or people who would be in the know-how? That's one. And then two, which communities do we want to hear from and in what way, and what our plan is for that. Because we're doing really well on time, but then, you know, July, August, September, October come and go, and then here we are in the recommendation phase of our time together, which is the fall and winter. And I don't want to let all the time we do have together kind of slip us by. So, you know, we've talked about potentially hearing back from folks at parks to talk about the role of parks and kind of sensory disabilities and maybe invisible disabilities in park planning and beautification and accessibility in the city. I'd love to talk about public education outreach, which we can talk about maybe amongst ourselves or others that don't know. Transportation would be worth having folks talk about transportation. So maybe some from charities could come and talk to us. I don't know. But the list is long because we're only doing maybe one or two things a month. And we only have however many months we have left together. So love to hear folks' reactions to that. And then of course, the community outreach as well. Christina, I see your hand.
Yeah, so in light of the incident last night, at UGM, was that correct?
Right.
I think one of the things I was kind of hoping was if we could have maybe some sort of formal communication strategy for when things like that happen, because apparently the alleged attacker had mental health issues, so that's a disability. And I don't want to say we need to put more light on things like that happening, but when they do happen, I think it would be helpful to remind people that people with mental illness, which is a disability, are not generally more violent than the general population. Just something that shows we're aware and we're thinking about it and it's important.
I think that point is very well taken, Christina. One clarifying question would be, when you say we, do you mean the city releases something, the HRC releases something? What do you mean by that exactly?
We need the task force, but I think we could look at that at HRC, we could look at that as well. I don't know, is that something that we could do as a task force or not?
Well, it's a fair question. As a staff person initially reacting to that, I'd want to think about it and come back, but I know generally it's important to think about each of the incidents and then where and how the communication is being planned and occurring. And so what this may be is a recommendation to anyone that's putting out a news release or a media communication at that time, to a set of reminders and offering of language that could be included that we have ready to go in the event of something like this happening, that we could offer in real time while those conversations are happening. And then maybe paired with proactive information that's shared, you know, with media outlets about that. That makes sense. I would not see us, at least without a lot more thought, being in a position to release a separate news release than from what, like maybe the Salem Police Department is releasing when they're discussing a violent crime incident. Being one city, I can't see multiple news releases coming out, but I think advising or sharing perspective both proactively and then at the moment of reactive could be really helpful. That's just my initial reaction on it. It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I like that idea, uh, being a resource for just suggested language. I think that's really good.
Yeah,
Not, not put too fine a point on it, oh, go ahead, Tony, I'm
Well,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, I mean, maybe that's one of our recommendations to the city is that in policy, it states that, you know, you're not going to use mental health disparaging language, and take the opportunity to maybe get in front of people in the community who are gonna take a negative perspective and speak derogatorily about marginalized people in our community. It's a great opportunity, for us to maybe, or the city to, direct
yeah,
by, I mean, I agree with Christina. I mean, I know that I have already had to remind people that, mental health issues exist and, people who generally behave in that way are experiencing some kind of crisis. And if we had responded more appropriately, maybe we could have prevented the incident.
One thing, maybe Gretchen, did the city ever fill the communications role?
the city has selected someone and they start later in the month.
Okay, because I suspect there is a style guide somewhere.
We do have a
Um,
style guide, yes.
Yes, okay, so we could ask to incorporate into that style guide guidelines on talking about these types of things.
That makes sense, and I could see that flowing as a recommendation. For example, I remember one of the elements is about being person-centered in our language. You would say a person with a sensory disability, you wouldn't say, so that's an example of what's in there now, and I could see how building out a section around communicating around people in crisis with mental health disabilities, that could be really helpful for people. That's good.
I think my only comment, I really appreciate and agree with the spirit of the comment. I think the one challenge I can foresee is, as unfortunately the case last night, really hard to comment with any accuracy about what's happening during an investigation.
Yeah,
So it's really, that is a challenge that I know is real. So, and none of the reporting that I read, and I've only read a couple of articles, spoke to the person's mental state or any disability that the person may or may not have had. So I don't know. That's the only challenge I can foresee is, there's a knee-jerk reaction. Certainly, I think there are guidelines generally that we can provide, certainly as things kind of come to light and whatever investigation unfolds, but it's hard to react in real time immediately to situations when we just don't know what's happening.
that's such a good point, and especially as a city, the city itself doesn't have qualified mental health professionals to say if someone has a disability and who are we to out them or share about them privately when you're talking about an individual. Like, I mean, in this case, today's news release named a name of a person who has been arrested.
Yeah.
And we'd be in no position to discuss their mental health background. That's a really excellent point. It might be, to Christina's point, about trying to contribute into the broader conversation and like how Tony said, you've been in multiple conversations. What is the language that we can have that kind of comes alongside and surrounds these discussions when people speculate
Yeah.
or speak about populations? It might be along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's part of why I was trying to be really careful in the words that I chose when I was trying to explain it, right? Because
Yeah.
we don't, all I know is what I saw in news, right? So that's all I can, uh, speak.
So more on this topic of reaching out to folks and planning events and kind of soliciting input from the public. I really do want to leave today with an idea of what that looks like. So it does take time. for us and for staff to make those successful and robust encounters. So, do folks have a sense of the sort of outreach they'd like to do? And if so, with whom and in what way? I think would be best in service of both our time and scope and obviously the time of the public.
I can, Tony, maybe we're thinking the same thing. I remember last month you offered to gather some folks from Sequoia. I did take a chance to check in and find out, like, could we use the community room and would that be okay? And it sounds like it would be. So please go ahead. I think that is a really viable idea.
Okay, so, yeah, my thoughts around that, one is that, we probably want to develop a questionnaire that very clearly probes for the data that we're looking to acquire. And I think we want to be consistent in our conversations with people. And then you can take additional notes if somebody, starts speaking outside of, and you find that the topic, has relevance and you want to record it. I think it might be more effective if there were, several of us and we did a presentation in the community room, but then, had one-on-one time using that questionnaire to fine tune the data that we're collecting. So those are my thoughts so far. And in Eunice's email, she did say that the planning department was interested in participating in that activity. So they are interested in what we can learn.
So that's great. So your recommendation, Tony, would be, if I heard you correctly, going, presenting, and then more one-on-one time. Do you think there's a component where we could engage with folks? And I appreciate people may be more willing to share things one-on-one. I like that and I agree with that. But I think there's also some value of being in community with each other too. If folks feel they hear someone else share something and they wouldn't otherwise share it, they might share it. What's your sense of that?
No, I agree. That's why, I think that, having a group situation where we present and let them know, what we're looking for and what what our goals are. But then, like I said, with the people who really want to share specifics about their story, we sit down one-on-one, because, when I'm looking at the community of people that I'm talking about, you run the gamut, including literacy issues, which is a big problem because where I live, whenever there's a problem, they tend to put up a sign. There's no communication to the community. They just put up a sign. Most of the people who live there can probably read the words. They don't necessarily comprehend the meaning or the intention of what that sign is trying to convey, the behavior that they're trying to modify, correct. So, I don't think that we can do a questionnaire and give it to everybody because people aren't going to be able to necessarily communicate.
Yeah, if I could add to this, I like the idea. I wouldn't want to necessarily just limit it to Sequoia Crossing because
Oh, no,
I know that
absolutely not.
Community Action Agency and Salem Housing Authority also partner on Uquina Hall and Redwood Crossing, which are similar projects, and I think getting input from those units would be helpful. I like the idea of a questionnaire piece of it, and I think there's room to collaborate with Community Action Agency and their case managers. I think if we were intentional in, kind of sharing that intent behind the leadership team for the permanent supportive housing programs, that I think they would find a lot of value in that. And I think a lot of the case managers and some of their, just interactions would be willing to, especially for those that, as you mentioned, they might not be able to just comprehend and fill out the questionnaire on their own. I could see a lot of those case managers proactively working with some of those clients. I love the idea of, kind of having a discussion and, presenting to them. I think a lot of times, people in those spaces just feel like they're kind of overlooked and they're not able to really have necessarily a seat at a table to voice those concerns. And I also would think if we if we do an event like that, I could honestly see some representatives from Salem Housing Authority wanting to be, present just to, hear what's said in the room. I know we've worked with a lot of the folks over at Salem Housing Authority, and they're very passionate about, their permanent supportive housing work. And I know the representatives from Community Action Agency are as well. And so I think it could also just be a really good launching platform, not just for what we're doing for this task force, but I think it could also provide a lot of really great insight as those organizations plan their next, permanent supportive, housing projects moving forward. So I agree. I would love to, however we envision this and everything, I would love to, get involved. I can, definitely reach out to contacts at Community Action that run those programs.
Okay, well, I am gonna warn you, but they don't have the best relationship with all of the residents, and some of them might pull back.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that they can get us some good data from some of the people, but I think that some of the people that they have alienated and they have prevented them from accessing services and the facilities are also people we want to glean information from.
But yeah, I think, I think it's a good way of marrying maybe all of these comments. I think, for one, it's us doing the outreach and we would be there. And people can come who are not, this task force and this commission. I think they ought to, because they're partners of ours in the community. But we're also, we're the ones building kind of relationships and rapport with these folks. And one thing is, that the needs of these communities are often marginalized and left out. But they're also so often kind of just grabbed and then left. But nothing happens with people's stories. And so I don't want to do that either, and so I think kind of relationship building is important. Going in person is important. I hope maybe that might mitigate some of the concerns that you probably appropriately identified, Tony. When do we think we could start doing that? So we'll need some lead up time to develop one survey, which I also like that idea. Getting some coordinating folks, what people's capacity are. I mean, I can envision us going to maybe a couple of sites in the course of a day or 2 or 3, and do not to.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing.
Rob questions time, but and it doesn't have to be all of us, although it'd be nice if there were a bunch of us there, but it could be as many as just the 4 of us or whatever, Did that. So this month, obviously, I don't think it's gonna be possible, but I don't know.
July,
August.
Mhm.
Does that seem doable? Gives us time. What do you think, Robert?
Say August.
August?
I think it gives a little more time for planning and be a little more thoughtful on how we do it. I would hate to, jump the gun. I think if we, offer kind of a questionnaire type form, if we want to try to gather some information ahead of, that, I think giving people more time to, kind of process that questionnaire, conduct the questionnaire versus, hey, here's the questionnaire, we're doing this event a week from tomorrow.
Yeah.
I also will say it gives us ample time as commission members, those of us who are commission members, to think about what we've gotten from the survey
Mhm.
this year as well, which we'll hear about on Wednesday, I think, right?
A week from this Wednesday,
Week
the
from this
Human
Wednesday.
Rights Commission will get the results
next
of the
Wednesday.
belonging survey that we've done in partnership with Western as Joaquin is sharing.
And those we always overquote on the experiencing houselessness is to hear in particular kind of the contours of their experience of belonging in Salem. And so we'll be armed with another militaristic analogy of like, we'll be armed with that data. We should really retire some of that language. It's kind of tired, but anyways, by August, so that'll be a good time. So, okay, so I've heard a lot of interest and I agree with the need for that community outreach. Any other communities that we want to be hearing from, and in what way do we reach out to those folks?
Maybe other community partners like Project Able and Recovery Outreach Community Center, because that's part of their job, is to mitigate accessibility issues for their clients and working with businesses or whatever.
Those are 2 great examples, Tony. We have a number of organizational contacts at various groups that work with people with disabilities. And you could organize something that brings together a number of people, and we could send that out to the organizations. Hey, would you mind inviting your clients, your guests, your the people, your customers, the people that you serve, and see who we have, if you think that kind of blended kind of town hall type community forum or gathering could work. And we could send it out to Project Able, all of them,
Yeah.
if you think that would be helpful.
I was just thinking of, there's also the Hanger Clinic that's right by the hospital. And I
Oh.
know that they're more of a I can never say the word, prosthetist. And I
Yes.
wonder if they have connections with maybe, like, if our hospital has a trauma center for those who are coming to their disabilities. Because I know that that can be a process, trying to figure out accessibility when you are acquiring a disability when you've never really had one your entire life.
Yeah.
That is true. There is, sorry, Tony, there's a gentleman that works at Rock that, lost his leg in an accident about 7 years ago. And, you know, he still struggles with that. You know, he says he wakes up in the morning and for that first 10 to 30 seconds, he doesn't remember. And then, you know, and then 6 years later, it was still very active in his life.
I think all three of those, the two you mentioned, Tony, and then the prosthetics place that you mentioned, Haley, would be great places to reach out to.
Bet.
I think one thing I'm thinking of, and I can hear Jeffrey in my ear talking. He rightfully pointed out, you know, there's a lot of folks who can't leave home, are not engaged in public processes. Any ideas about how we reach those folks? We don't have to have an answer tonight, right now, so we have quite a bit of homework right now from what we've already talked about, but I want to have that conversation. If folks have any ideas about reaching those folks who might not otherwise be able to engage in these kind of public conversations.
Could Meals on Wheels help us with that?
Oh, maybe. We certainly have a partnership with Meals on Wheels here at Center 50 Plus. And so we could, I would be happy to explore that. That's a good thought.
Another thought is the non-medical in-home caregiving groups.
Yeah.
They might be able to
Yeah.
at least help get the word out if we have a online version
Yeah.
or like if we do another Zoom where they can get involved.
Yeah.
There's a couple of big providers here that do that. There's also the oh my gosh, what's it called? There's a commission, a statewide commission that does that sort of policy work. I'm
Yeah.
totally blanking on the name. Home Care Commission? Is that what it's called?
Or
No.
is it the Home Health Commission?
I don't, yeah,
Something like
maybe something like that. I
yeah.
can't remember. And I know somebody who's on that commission who might
Good.
be able to think about that. I would need to reach out to Mark King is his name. Go, sorry.
DSP, are those able to help
Maybe,
notice? DSP,
yeah,
I think is what it's- yeah.
yeah.
Also, any organizations that provide peer support, like Project Able or Rock.
I think we'll have to be kind of proactive and kind of creative with that kind of outreach, but I think it's really important
Yeah.
to capture, you know, as many voices and perspectives as possible. So I thank you for that conversation. The last one I want to make sure we really think about is, and maybe we're right here where we need to be, but our older folks in Salem. I am every day so righteously mad about how we don't serve folks who are older in this country. I have the luxury of being from a kind of different culture. That is not true, you know, in other societies, in other cultures, and I just do not understand why we don't do things. And I'm part of this move that you're talking about ad nauseum to everybody who will listen is to take care of my grandmother who is aging and my aunt who we also take care of, who is also aging. And so this is like a very real thing for me every day. I think about these things. And I really want to make sure that part of that our disability lens doesn't lose folks who are older who, you know, what's the classic refrain, you know, anyone can become disabled and as if you age, live long enough, you will, you know, and so, you know, making sure that we are getting the older demographic as well is really important to me. And so I would love to see an event right back here at Center Plus,
You bet.
talking to folks. We could fill a room, you know, talking to folks and hearing from them about what their needs are and And I think that's really important to me in this for this task force in particular.
Sorry, I know a lot of those non-medical caregiving groups, at least when I lived in Colorado and worked for them, a majority of our population was the elderly.
Yeah.
So I know that should help with at least hopefully reaching out to some of them. 'Cause
Yeah.
if we covered people who were on Medicare and Medicaid. So.
Yeah. And you know, and there are folks who are older who need at-home care, as you mentioned. And we wanna meet their needs. And then there are folks who are older, folks who are disabled, pick your qualifier.
Yeah.
Who are not in their home and living their life. We wanna make sure that they have access to everything they need too. And so being able to straddle both worlds and both needs, which probably have a lot of overlap, but probably have areas where they diverge, I think is really important to me.
You might be interested in exploring the intersectionality of Center 50+'s age-friendly initiative. I know they're taking a section every year of a broader objective around making Salem an age-friendly city.
Yeah.
You know? And so
That's awesome.
there could be some intersectionality there. We could explore that or learn about that and see what recommendations in that we could bolster maybe with our work.
And what about Salem Health's educational department? You know, they do a lot of training for people with new diagnoses.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with them. Is that
Check,
Huh?
is it called
I
the
think you're right.
Community Health Education Center?
Yes. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, there might be another, there might be another place of intersection there. That's a great point. Yeah.
so I
That could be
just,
a
so I
place.
feel like we're kind of, we have an idea, kind of,
Mhm.
some folks we're imagining when we reach out to kind of coming together. I'm gonna turn to our staff person now and say, June, checking in, doing outreach, nothing before July, August, or what do you think?
Well, building on what Robert said, I wonder if in June, task force members could be thinking precisely about what the questions would be that you think would help you the most as you imagine moving into the fall. We did some beginning work, you know, the document you brought last time, Joaquin, around what are our focus areas, what are we starting to coalesce around? I wonder if you did some thinking on what the questions would be or the agenda. And we could start getting a sense of how long would that take? Like I'm imagining a format that Tony is describing where we have some initial presentation. We offer some time in a group setting for just group discussion, but then we intentionally leave time at the end for people to break off and have one-on-one conversations to be able to talk with individual task force members or staff. So you can start seeing if you get a sense of the questions. I think we could, in June, reach some of these locations. If it's okay, if all of you are okay with what we've explored, I could start getting some dates on the book. Like,
Yeah.
you know, week 1 in August we'll go here, week 2 we'll go here, week 3 we'll go here, maybe, and then start plugging you all into which of you can go to which of these opportunities. And maybe aim for, I mean, as many of you as possible, but at least maybe 2 or 3 of you at each of the things.
Yeah.
And then it would probably, we need to make a commitment to come out with the data in a way that'll help inform the full task force. Because that makes me think not all of you will be at everything. And so we need to be able to come back in September with a pretty good, robust report.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but I think it'd be good to get a sense of if you liked generally what you heard, I could start working on making it concrete. And if you could be thinking about what questions you'd love to have asked with these things, I think that would help us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and I could just start making some dates and saying, okay, here's the schedule,
Yeah.
if you want.
I would love, you know, I think maybe Tony, you may have some ideas, if you could send me and Greg some ideas, I'd be happy to draft something and then give it back out to folks and kind of give a thumbs up or whatever
Right.
and kind of shop that around. Recognizing that it doesn't have to be final this month, but we want to
Yeah.
have something to talk about next time we come together
Yeah,
in July and then so that also will allow Gretchen to really better frame it, what you just finished saying, you know, what sort of outreach we'll be doing to these folks.
Yep.
I'll try to get that turned around as quickly as possible, so if folks have input, please provide some of that, and I might even call Mary Ann or something.
Yeah. And it also sounded like an online piece is an idea, so building from those questions, then it sounds like we would have both a meeting agenda and we would produce perhaps a hard copy document for people who like hard copy, but also an online survey where we have the collection. Yeah. Great. Would you object if I preliminarily make an assumption that each thing would take 2 hours and start trying to get some venues set up? Would that be comfortable just based on this preliminary discussion?
And that feels fine.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, we could always back out if you're like, wait, no, I don't like that one, or no one can come to whatever. Yeah, okay, great.
And it's also totally fine if only a couple of us can go. I mean, this, I want everyone to be there if they can and want to, but this is gonna be probably quite a few meetings in short succession, so it's no pressure.
That's great.
Great, thank you, Gretchen,
Yeah.
and we'll be in touch about that, for sure. Okay, so I feel good about that. I feel less good about where we are with what's happening in July in terms of topic. Parks,
I could check our parks planners availability. I could check on the age-friendly initiative team's availability, and we should be hearing back from Northwest ADA TA Center
okay,
I invited them to either the July or August
Okay.
meeting.
and
What-
if thank you for all of that. I think, it may be fine to have two presentations. We leave for an hour and a half. I mean, if we went in knowing that each was gonna be, 40 minutes or so, that would give us time in the beginning and the end to do other things.
Okay,
I also don't wanna overpack something, but I don't want to just be kind of languishing either, so. Okay, so let's send out those invitations for parks and
will do.
the aging initiative.
Age-friendly initiative.
Thank you, age-friendly initiative, and we'll see where we are for July, but hopefully we'll have those concretized soon.
Great.
If that feels good for everybody, I don't want to speak.
Feels good to me.
That's sort of the pleasure.
Getting wrong.
I love it.
Okay, Chris, anything? Thanks for being here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, that feels like we have some momentum there in the next few months. Are there any member remarks or announcements?
This is Gretchen, not being a member, but as a staff person hoping to squeeze into this section.
Please.
There were a couple of questions from the last meeting. One of them we got to earlier with our conversation with Christina that we didn't know the answer yet. Another question was around getting information about audible signals. You might remember we had a discussion about pedestrian safety. I wanted you to know that we did an update to the city's ADA transition plan a couple years ago that focused on the crosswalks and audible signals. So there's some information about where those are, and then we've been slowly building in more of those as we do plans and projects around the city. But I can get anyone that document if you'd like to see it, but wanted you to know that was our last update on that topic as a couple of years ago. There was also a discussion about apps, some really good points about you wonder if an app on an individual pedestrian cell phone would help. And I did a little homework on that and learned there are some apps, but in some discussion with some folks at Oregon Commission for the Blind, their experience has been variable in those. There can be a touch of delay in connectivity, because often how those apps work is there'll be a person live on with you when you're traveling who will be able to see where you are and talk to you about the experience, but you don't really have a lot of time when it's time to cross the street, and when you have connectivity technology delays, that's not helpful. So I think my impression is it's an emerging technology, and I didn't learn about one strategy that's really knocking it out of the park, but I think there's a lot of interest in that strategy. But that's what I was able to learn on that so far. Another question, oh, go ahead. Does somebody want to add to that?
Yeah, sorry, on that note, I can always talk to one of my who is or a couple of my friends who are visually impaired and see what they use. Because I know one of them who is completely blind, he has used an app that it does have someone on the other end and they tell you what's around you, but he has had those connectivity issues. So I can see what else he does in those
Be
situations.
fascinating, Haley. I think that'd be super helpful. Thank you. I'd love to learn just as a person who works in this space and it could be helpful for this group. Maybe it'll lead to there's a recommendation in here somewhere, you know?
Yeah. If you guys are okay, because he's a gabber. He would love to talk to everyone.
Oh.
So- I could always, if it's okay, suggest he hop on the Zoom at one point.
Well, there's always an opportunity at the beginning of the meeting for public comment. It's limited to 3 minutes, but the chair or you all can design opportunities for people to speak longer should you desire that.
He could be, yeah, either a public commenter or I'd be happy to have like a guest speaker role, like 10 minutes or something if he wants to.
I think that'd be, I think that'd be great. I think it'd be, I too would just like to hear what their experience is like. I mean, I couldn't even imagine having to navigate, the world being, somebody that can see everything, around me. And there are a lot more challenges that come with that, being visually impaired, being, completely in the dark about what's going on. So I would welcome him joining the conversation and providing his, perspective.
Yeah,
I can
and
reach out to him.
Great,
that
thanks.
that would be great. But also, I think Robert had looked at a few things. Remember, Robert? There were
Yes.
apps that can integrate with cities' traffic signal infrastructure.
Yeah, I can send you that, what I
Yeah, I still
Cool.
have that. But I know a couple
Yes.
transportation planners from larger cities that might be able to
Yeah.
give us some more information on the how well those apps are working.
Yeah,
Does that
thank
make
you. I
sense?
remember a conversation with our traffic engineer about that a bit back, but I'm not remembering the details. Thank you for reminding me, please.
Yeah,
Yeah, bring that. Speaking of that team, and just one other quick side note, I know there's a meetup planned tomorrow for a couple of folks on the city team and the state and a state ADA coordinator to talk with people or a person who is both deaf and blind to discuss how they experience navigating downtown. So that should be a good conversation too, and I'll bring downtown Salem. So I'll bring some updates from that discussion too. There may be some insights that person shares that could be helpful with recommendations. Good, okay. I also wanted to mention, there was a question about there's no crosswalk to River Road Park, which is one of our main, that's a pretty significant park, one of our major splash pads is there, for example. I wanted to let you know that I learned we do plan to improve the crossing of both River Road Northeast and Liberty Street Northeast at the southern entrance to Fred Meyer, which will improve those crosswalks to the park. And it's approximately dialed in for next year. So I wanted you to know of that. And then there was some discussion about how do you prioritize once you have a list of critical ADA routes. And I think in general, that looks pretty iterative and dynamic based on factors in addition to the ADA, like funding, safety issues in general, balance across the city, I think are all factors that come into play in that. But within selecting critical ADA routes, I know they think about access to key destinations, transit, as well as crash data to kind of help pull it all together. And the transportation system plan will be updated in the coming year, and they'll be looking at getting input on critical ADA routes and what should they be. So I wanted to share those updates, just some details from our last conversation.
DSP up in next year.
Yes,
Very ambitious timeline, Rich.
yes.
That's in the next couple of years.
Yeah, next couple, I
Yeah, we'll
should
see.
say.
Very
Yeah,
ambitious.
fair.
I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Well, my one note is we're gonna add a staff report section to the agenda here.
Oh, yeah,
next time.
sure, we'll do. Yeah,
Good
good.
idea.
Any other member remarks or announcements? Well, thank you, Gretchen, for those wonderful updates. I look forward to those continued conversations, and thank you all for your time tonight. I give you the balance of our meeting time, which is 1 minute. And it's 7:29, and we are adjourned. Thank you. Enjoy the beautiful evening.
Thank you.